Hello and welcome. My name is Shannon Kemp, and I'm the Chief Digital Officer of DataVersity. We would like to thank you for joining this DataVersity webinar, Human-Centered IT, Data-Powered Results, Optimizing Workflows with Unified Data Fabric, sponsored today by Big Panda. Just a couple of points to get us started. Due to the large number of people that attend these sessions, you will be muted during the webinar. For questions, we will collect them via the Q&A section. And if you'd like to chat with us or with each other, we certainly encourage you to do so. And just a note, Zoom defaults the chat to send to just the panelists, but we absolutely change it to network with everyone. To find the Q&A or the chat panels, you can find those icons in the bottom middle of your screen. And as always, we will send a follow-up email within 2 business days containing links to the slides, the recording of this session, and any additional information requested throughout the webinar. Now, let me introduce to you our speakers for today, Nathan Bao and C. Beers. Nathan is a Senior Product Manager with experience in business intelligence and cloud providers. At Big Panda, Nathan focuses on vertical specific research and empowering customers to leverage data for proactive decision making. C is the Principal Solutions Architect at Big Panda. With expertise in data analysis and platform integration, C helps clients streamline their incident management processes by leveraging their deep knowledge of observability and AI ops. They are skilled in consultative technical engagement and finding innovative solutions. And with that, I will turn the floor over to C and Nathan for our presentation. Hello and welcome.
Hey, everyone.
Hey, everyone. Hi, Shannon.
Hello.
Let me just take over this screen share. All right. Good morning, everyone. My name is Nathan. Today, C and I will be focused on the power of unified data, and we'll be using the specific example of incident response process to illustrate this importance. So for those unfamiliar, the incident response process often involves multiple teams, monitoring diverse data sources, servicing many different stakeholders and customers. When an alert fires, teams are responsible for resolving issues themselves. If they're unable to, then they're responsible for bringing different teams into the fold to help with the resolution. As you can see here, there's a lot of different tools, there's a lot of different teams, and overall, this process is not easy. This can lead to duplicate alerts and fragmented siloed information. And as a result, responders face significant challenges. They're slowed down by these data silos, incidents take longer to resolve. Overall, this creates a painful and inefficient experience for everyone involved. And to be short, this is the opposite of human-centered IT. Usually on this slide, we also have kind of like flames that are going across the whole entire slide, but I left that out for today's purposes. So now about Big Panda, our goal is to make the incident response process more efficient and smoother. And we achieve this by ingesting, normalizing, correlating, and presenting and enriching data in a clear and actionable way. Big Panda essentially offers an AI-powered platform for event and incident management designed to support every stage of the incident response process. Today, we'll dive into the problems caused by data silos, specifically in the example of incident response. We'll explore solutions on how to tackle data fragmentation and also highlight the resulting use cases and benefits that are unlocked once data unification is achieved. So let's start with some interesting insights from research Big Panda recently did. We partnered with an analyst firm called Enterprise Management Associates, or EMA for short, at the end of last year, 2024. Essentially, the survey asked 300 IT leaders about their adoption of platforms such as Big Panda, and we asked them about the pain points they were experiencing and how they envisioned AI-powered IT solutions could help. One question that I found particularly insightful, and I think one that is really good to open up our conversation today, is the one that you see on the screen right now. The question is, what are the biggest challenges to effective incident response and management? And as you can see, one challenge that clearly stands out is people. Many of the IT leaders that were surveyed explained that figuring out who the right people are to involve in an incident is a major struggle. I think this makes perfect sense, especially when you look at the second biggest challenge, which is the lack of unified view and dependency. And if you scan further down the list, you also spot issues like understanding the true impact of an incident and inefficient workflows. all of which I think we can argue are made worse by data silos and even could originate from data fragmentation itself, that lack of a single connected view of information. So, C, I wanted to start off. What is your reaction to this survey? Does it reflect the pain points of the customers you work with day to day?
Yeah, absolutely. I would love to say I'm surprised by these results, but quite the opposite. Like everything on here are definitely sentiments that I hear from clientele in the field. And they do describe the challenge of siloed data and lack of a unified data fabric in different ways, depending on what their context is. But everybody's describing the same problem. So the problem is definitely felt across organizations in all their variety of teams, with each team seeing it from their perspective, but describing a larger thing, whether they're aware of it or not, which is process just doesn't operate without a unified data fabric. And there's a lot of reasons for that we'll probably get into in a bit.
Yeah, I think that's very conclusive in terms of also what I see when I listen to customer calls and talk to customers themselves. See, in your opinion, why is this such a challenge? Why is consolidating this data so difficult for the enterprise organizations we work with?
Well, I think some of it is just our legacy habituation. If you roll the clock back 10, 20, if we're being brave, maybe roll it back even 30 years, like the way that we approached the IT solution space was very team oriented. You had teams that were almost exclusively aligned with functions, and those teams operated with other teams insofar as they were able to, but they operated mostly in isolation. And so we had this legacy mindset, and like all legacy mindsets, they echo into the future, much longer than we would like them to. And I think the other thing that exacerbates this problem is that the volumes of data that we've been trying to negotiate have been increasing geometrically year over year. And so you take that legacy approach to information, you heap on top of it the fact that there's only more and more of it. And then we see everybody trying to look at a great volume of information through their small perspective, and no joy comes from that. Unsurprisingly.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I think a big part of this conversation is focusing on kind of like how data, the lack of data unification affects the people involved in the incident response process. I'm particularly interested in kind of from your experience, what are some of the biggest frustrations or pain points that individuals deeply involved in the incident response process commonly face because of this challenge itself? I'm talking kind of like the L1 help desk or the knock operators that we tend to focus on in our roles.
Yeah. And I think the key word in all of that is process. To the previous point, like when we talk to a particular team or a small constellation of teams, they're generally serving a mission with their data that they're very satisfied with. And that's a very tactical thing that works out for them. But when you scale that up and you take a dozen or more of those teams, all of them only thinking about their own facet on that information, we fail to serve the process. When we're talking about something like incident response, we're talking about a process. A process necessarily has to have all of that data to operate efficiently, right? Like it needs the observability data, it needs the operational feedback, it needs the full spectrum of data to be successful. And this is the disconnect that we often see. We think about data from team or functional perspectives, and we don't think about how that does not quite get us to the finish line when we start looking at a process, which is quite frankly, that's the layer that we're measuring business value at, right? Like teams are measured by a KPI, but business value is measured at a process level. And we need the widest variety of data to serve those processes.
Right. I think I agree with a lot of the points that you made. And when it gets to when you have to get to the finish line, which is an incident response, is resolving the incident, it's really hard to get there. And from what we've talked about, see in the lead up to this, that operators do face a lot of the negative business outcomes. And I was listening to this call the other week. It was a prospect call. It was essentially a large retailer. And they were saying they came to Big Panda to talk about an example that they were facing last Black Friday. Some of their branch locations in the mall, and I think it was in the Mid-Atlantic region, had POS failures, and they were not able to really discern the root cause of the issue. And instead of everyone enjoying their holiday break, many of the stakeholders who were responsible for the various different parts of the process, not only like the team looking over POS systems, there were teams looking over database, over network, also some engineering teams had to come in too. They were called into this long bridge call, essentially to quote unquote work together. I put quotes on the work together because a lot of these times these calls are very long, and most of the time it's about proving innocence rather than finding a solution. I think that manual investigation is a huge part of it, but it's really sifting through individual sources of data just to find some kind of anomaly that can maybe lead to the root cause. It's a really painful process. And to sum up the story, after a couple of hours, the team was able to find the solution and put the POS systems in the malls in the Mid-Atlantic regions back online. But it was at the expense of human hours and human hours that were taken away from families during the holidays. So I think that um, kind of sums up the pain that at least people every day on the ground feel because of data fragmentation.
Yeah, that it's a very real scenario that you sketch out. Like, the noise is a result of us not being able to determine what is useful versus what is not useful. The long bridge call goes right back to your your point about the bridge call is more about proof of innocence than it is the considered pursuit of causality, right? So we've got all these people on this bridge call because we don't have a unified data fabric. We are literally accessing their data through the human interface, the most expensive and inefficient way we possibly can. We get on, if we're lucky, it's a video interface. If we're less lucky, a lot of the people are just joining by voice. And we do have this roll call of exoneration that you described, where everyone's like, it ain't me. I think it's so and so. And so pipes up and is like, nope, it's not me. It's got to be the such and such. And like the reason that we even go through this charade is the fact that we do not have a unified data fabric where we have sorted what is useful from what is not useful. We're not overwhelmed by noise, and we're able to piece together causality in a much more direct and efficient manner because we have all the raw material that it takes. We don't have to drag humans into the mix. Like we can look at the data and go, okay, we may not know 100%, but we know 90% confidence that it's this. So instead of getting everyone in IT on the bridge call, like let's get the three groups that are most likely to be able to solve this, right? Then the stress goes down, the expense goes down, everything goes down. But yeah, this nightmare that you describe is the direct result of a lack of unified data.
Right. I think those are great insights. I know like briefly you talked about, business value, and I think that's something that a lot of IT leaders focus on, since they're not necessarily involved in the process day to day, but they kind of oversee the different KPIs and the value it brings to the organization. That being said, what are some of the key challenges and frustrations that arise specifically for IT leaders due to the presence of data silos? And like, essentially, what is it preventing them from doing?
Well, that's an excellent question. Like one of the things that leaders struggle with is they are looking at a bigger picture. And I think for a lot of our technologists, we have again because of our legacy processes and procedures, we focused mostly on what I will call machine data or telemetry that is coming from computing fabrics or IT solution fabrics of one form or another. And yes, that has been the foundation stone of operational data, but it's actually not operational data. That machine data tells us how our configured solution space is doing. It does not tell us how well we are responding to that solution space. That last bit of the operational data. And the leaders, they need to bring together a synthesis of machine data and operational data such that they can understand, is this process working? And if it's not working, and this second question may be the most important, like it's easy enough to know when you're failing. It's much harder to pinpoint exactly where am I failing. And I think some of our historical measurements, like our MTTXs, they're actually compound measurements where you can't separate operational data from machine data, and you can't answer the leader's question of, where do I need to prioritize my resources? Do I need to have better observability or better coverage or better metadata from that area? Or do I need to improve my response processes and procedures where we may be missing SLAs just because we've got human error? A leader, if you can't point them to where they can put their resources, their hands are really in the air. You've left them with nowhere to go.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. One thing that I'll highlight is I was actually reading a research from Gartner that DataVersity also uses the stat too, in one of their articles that I found this morning. But essentially, Gartner stated that data fragmentation can cost leaders up to $12 million a year. That's a pretty exorbitant number. And I think it definitely goes into the fact that, they have resources to spend, but it's a matter of like, are we able to find the right place to invest our money? And particularly, will that investment have a greater effect not on the IT organization, but the processes that the IT team um, supports for, the greater business? For example, like financial services, is it powering the transactions that, for the capital markets, or for retailers, is it a way for them to invest to make supply chains faster or improve the customer experience? So I think there are a lot of unknowns because of data silos and data fragmentation that you do bring up.
Yeah, absolutely.
Great. I think we can move on. So I think our conversation so far has really highlighted the significant challenges that data silos create for everyone involved. But now I think it's important to move on to kind of the core of why we're here today and discuss the practical ways to start tackling the problem of data fragmentation. So see, and then this might be a complicated question because it depends on the organization, depends on the type of enterprise. But what do you think is the best starting point for organizations looking to unify their data?
Yeah. Yeah, certainly, like your mileage may vary depending on your specific industry or your specific market vertical, but there are some common denominators that work across all of these descriptions. And essentially, you have to put into place a process of continuous improvement. I think one of the fundamental mistakes we make about data in general, not just siloed data, is that we understand it at a point in time and we fool ourselves into thinking that we understand it ever after. And I'm not sure why we fall victim to this. I found myself doing it when I'm not thinking. But basically, we are working with the most dynamic solution spaces we've ever had in the history of computing. For us to think that the data, emanating from these solutions is not incredibly dynamic is just, it's unnecessarily hopeful. Like we have to design practices that can keep up with the dynamic nature of our data. And so the core mechanism that I use, and in our market vertical, I have a lot of specifics around how I advise clients to go about this. But the core equation is measure, adjust, measure. Like if you're finding that your data is not achieving you're not able to serve your mission with your data, you have to have a means of measuring that data. Like if you're just collecting data ad hoc and hoping that through some soothsayer mechanism, you're going to actually find truths emerge from it. Yeah, no. Like any data that's coming in has to be measured. It has to be measured at such a degree of resolution that you can separate out, basic things like machine data from operational data. And then you have to know what adjustments can I make with this data to potentially get a better outcome. And that process of continuous improvement, which is almost always embedded in data analytics, is the difference between survival or the alternative.
Right. I think one thing I really like the framework that you brought up is measure, adjust, and measure again. And I think that really resonates with me, particularly because I think at Big Panda we always talk with our customers about, starting small. There are people coming with us with, I don't know, 20, 25, maybe 30 plus data sources that they're looking to, ingest, normalize, and correlate all at one go. But at times it's not that easy to tackle all 30 of those data sources. So I think another tip that I'll add on to what you said, C, is really start small. Usually we recommend starting with three, maybe five max data sources, just to really understand what's really going on, and understand kind of like where are these data sources actually contributing to when it comes to the incident response process. And once there's like a very good understanding of that, again, it's following C's framework of measure, adjusting, measure, and really setting some key KPIs just to start small and understand where to go in terms of this continuous improvement framework. See, I think that brings up a good point. When it comes to kind of this framework that we talk about, what are some different KPIs that some people are using to kind of measure their continuous improvement, just kind of on top of your head?
Yeah. Um, well, it in our organization, we've kind of come up with ones that are specific to our vertical, but they are generally applicable to other market verticals. And it kind of breaks down into two components in my mind. You've regardless of what kind of data and data processing, data analytics that we're doing, where mostly that's about metadata. So the first questions we have to ask are, do we have the correct data coming in? Just in basically, if we think of this as hopefully to not get too nerdy, but if we think of it in key value pairs, as we oftentimes think about metadata, it's like, do we have the right keys? And then the next question is, do we have the right values for those keys? So what is the quality of our information? Now you can add in other measurements there to take that mission further, but I would skip down in the interest of time and then just say, have some measurements around how well you are executing on that data. So with that data, you're trying to execute some operational mission. How well is that mission going? Because it will be informative back to your data in kind of a feedback loop. If you find that operationally you've got deficiencies, you can usually chase it back to, hey, the reason that our operators are not operating efficiently is we're not giving them information with high utility. Like, what is it that we're missing? And then we end up back at our metadata analysis, realizing, well, oh, we didn't have all of the data. And this kind of reinforces your point, Nathan, about the fact that more is not always more. Like, it's oftentimes much better to, like you say, to start with 3 to 5 data sources and really understand your continuous improvement, understand like the quality of that data and where it may or may not have deficiencies, and then further, like, how well is that data serving the operational mission? And then once you've got it down for like 3 sources, you can rinse and repeat. But if you never get down that basic motion and understand how it is or isn't contributing to your successful outcome, all the data in the world is not going to help you.
Right. I think the 2 points that to summarize for the audience, I think the 2 points that you bring up, if you remember anything from this webinar, is when you think about data fragmentation and tackling this problem and trying to consolidate data, it's viewing the data first on the data quality itself, no matter what kind of data it is. There are some paradigms that you can use to measure the quality. And then second, how much does this quality affect either the process that it feeds into or the end product that you're using? So really the utility of the data that you're using, how does that affect the downstream? How does that affect the downstream processes and products that you are involved in? Would that kind of summarize it? Quality and utility, see?
100%, brother.
Great. And then the last thing I wanted to talk about is ROI. I know that again we do have some leaders on the call. How do we what are some effective ways to demonstrate ROI from significantly the specifically the process of data consolidation? Because it is a hefty project. There probably will be investments made. How can people start thinking about ROI?
Yeah, and I think you accurately mentioned leadership as being this is one of their largest challenges. Like how am I assuring the people I report to that what we're doing with our data is giving us maximum impact. Some of it goes back to our earlier discussion around how do leaders know where to prioritize such that their ROI is maximized. But also it comes back to like how well am I executing the processes that support my business value? And maybe in that point, I think it's really important that we measure business value accurately and pragmatically. Like, I think sometimes we assign KPIs to business value and we don't really realize, like, hey, how are we going to measure that? So, I have a dear colleague that refers to a lot of what we're discussing right now as the measurement miracle. And it really does come down to that. If it can't be measured, it really doesn't exist. And I think a lot of times we are predicating business value on things that we really haven't thought through as far as, hey, can we actually measure that? Can I prove that I have a return on investment versus, getting more of a qualitative measurement of how I feel about ROI? We need to be super diligent about making sure that ROI is a quantitative process. If it can't be expressed in an integer, it's probably not something that we should be basing ROI on.
Right. Yeah, and I think just to provide an example of what we see in our space, when we talk about ROI, it really comes down to kind of time saved. I know at the be closer to the start of this webinar, we talked about, the challenges that these data silos have on operators, specifically involved in the nitty-gritty of the incident response process. And a lot of the time, it's the hours spent investigating, it's the hours spent trying to resolve, it's the hours spent kind of sifting through all the noise. And when it comes to our space in terms of incident response, when we talk to leaders, we think about how, when you start with 3 to 5 data sources, how can we reduce the noise? And that's a quantitative value that we can go forth to our champion and then for them to share to their greater leaders of, look, we've reduced noise by 60, 70, even some close to 90% in the first couple weeks of engagement with our product. And then this translates to a lot of time, hours spent, sifting through useless data, if I can call it that, and more time focused on, focusing on like the P0, P1 incidents and really being proactive and preventing those from happening in the first place. And that's really measured on, time and then time multiplied by, you know, hourly wage or the salary of these individuals who are working that. So that's an example that we use where see, like you said, it's really small measurements, but we can really quantify those and measure them in our space to kind of showcase ROI as we move on to either bigger and scarier data sources or kind of like different parts of the process and different stages of the incident lifecycle, and really showcase kind of like value in terms of the overall process of data unification.
Yeah, excellent point. Like, I'm glad you highlighted that because I missed it there a bit, especially when you're talking to a leader. A leader really has to narrow their focus. It's not because they're myopic or they have tunnel vision. They really only have the luxury to consider time or money. So if as individual contributors or members of teams, when we're trying to make these, when we're trying to support our leaders with ROI, arguments, it's really, are we saving our company money? Like it's basically time or money, but time is actually money. So it really comes down to money. Like we can measure a lot of things, but are those things actually saving us money? And we start to, when we, this is where the intersection of measurement and return on investment gets into things like tools rationalization and, do we actually need all these things? And if we do, if we don't, like which ones do we not need, et cetera.
Right. Yeah, I think those are also great examples. And really that's the I will like to caveat that these are examples from our kind of like vertical and industry space, but I'm sure there might be some parallels with other folks in different industries or organizations here too. I think these are some great tips. And I did bring up apologies. I was a little slow to click the next one, but we did address a lot of the 5 points that we see here. And if we didn't touch on them, we're glad to touch on them in the Q&A section. Um, I think it's now, finally, I want to discuss like the exciting opportunities that data unification unlocks. I think these efforts aren't just about fixing problems, they open up a whole new realm of possibilities. So thinking back to our initial discussion about the impact of those directly involved in the incident response process, as we integrate more and more diverse data sources, what tangible effects does this have on the kind of like the day-to-day work and effect responsibilities of like people in the incident response process see?
Yeah. Well, from kind of a big picture, I think it forces us to rethink how we consider incident response. Again, like we pull the past forward with us. And I think a lot of the process and procedure that we've attacked incident response with was kind of designed in an era when we didn't have data unification. And so many of the steps, the procedural steps in our processes are actually predicated on those post data unification days. And I think it behooves us as process owners to rethink, like, do I really need to do this? Do we really need to say, if we were gonna take a pot shot at ITIL oriented incident management, there's a lot of bureaucracy there, and it's really a lot of human oversight that I think that if we challenge ourselves nowadays, we can see that our additional data and the wider spectrum of data that we're able to look at, it's like, yeah, we may not need that step anymore. So at least the thing that I'm trying to guide my clients at Big Panda through is like, hey, let's put it all on the table. Let's don't try and use our great new data, our unified data to serve a process that's actually 25 years old. Let's also look at that process and say, hey, does our unified data allow us to drop any of these steps or abbreviate them in such a way that we get back to that ROI? Are we saving time? And by extension, are we saving money? All of the things on the slide are legit, and we can take those absolutely at face value. I think also briefly, we brought up like tools rationalization and efforts to understand like what parts of our IT solution space are actually like contributing to the success of our mission, and which parts are not. And that is certainly like a question that you can only answer after data unification. Like I think in the past, a lot of that has been, borders on mysticism. Well, I got an intuition, or this team, argues better for their tool than the other team does. So I'm just going to go with this. So instead of like making decisions that are not based on this unification of data, and challenging processes that were built prior to its existence, we need to bring all that back into focus and see, is this still a legitimate way for us to execute our workflow?
Yeah, I think see that brings up a really good point. I've listened to some customers talk about how when it comes to tool rationalization or consolidation, I think the data points that support whether or not they should divest from a specific tool is very anecdotal, and it's very story based. I think is
Yeah.
the easier word for me to say. So
Yeah, no, 100%.
it's this person saying like, oh yeah, I see a lot of alerts come from this tool at this time, but there's no real data to showcase that, right?
Yeah. Yeah, no, it is very anecdotal, and it's literally the team that can make the best argument, or the team that has the, let's say, the greatest, social capital. Like, are you going to really argue with a whole division of Oracle DBAs that are saying we have OEM, or we're literally going to pick at the company? Like, it's like, well, we're going to keep OEM, not to lamb-based OEM. It's a fantastic tool, but my point is that in a siloed organization, and we are all siloed to a certain extent, no matter how far along in our data evolution we are, everybody is pitching their own tool. And it is, as you described, Nathan, it is a by definition a subjective discussion. And to make that ROI decision, you really have to flip that. It has to become an objective discussion that is driven by data rather than emotional attachment to my favorite tool.
Right. No, I completely agree. I think we've seen it more often than not that people have they have the hard data now. They can start having more conversations and start kind of increasing their influence, the breadth of influence across different, I guess in this case, silos, different teams, and say, hey, this is the hard data. This is what we're seeing. What do you have in terms of to justify kind of like the use cases that you have? So I think it really brings kind of like this data-oriented, data-informed decision making for many of the organizations that we work with.
Yeah,
Um,
no, agreed.
great. I think we can move on to the last topic. One use case, there's a fourth use case here that that I didn't bring up, but I think it's a hot topic that many of the people in the audience are thinking about is around AI powered automation. It's a hot topic, automation and AI. In your opinion, see, how does unified data help with these initiatives?
Well, like many things, like business value and efficient processes and return on investment, AI powered systems depend on high quality data, right? And so, we have to make sure that we have data unification. We have to make sure that we have data with high utility. But once we have achieved those things, and most organizations are so focused on those goals that they are actually achieving those things, then we get to say, okay, now how can we apply AI in such a way that it moves the needle in a meaningful way? In other words, it dovetails with our existing workflows in a way that doesn't discombobulate our human operators, and it shows a significant, return on investment. Like we keep coming back to this, but like initially, I think many of us are a bit skeptical about the overhype of AI, and that's fine. Like it's always good to kind of look at something through squinted eyes, but we really are seeing AI powered automation have a dramatic impact, especially in the topic of today's discussion, like our incident management process. We're doing things in that process with AI that literally took humans, multiple minutes, if not, honestly speaking, hours. Like how fast can we get that bridge call of exoneration together? Like how fast can we build an after action report? When we're going through the after action report, can we actually do an analysis of like our change management system to see where causality played into this major incident, et cetera? And at those junctures in our processes, we're finding that AI powered automation equals time saved in a very tangible way. Like we're not talking about saving seconds. We're talking about saving hours in expensive processes like major incident management.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. I think when it comes to data unification, we always hear this term garbage in, garbage out. And I think if you if your organization were to go through this process, it really helps revert that term. You want quality in so you can get quality outputs out. And by, you get objective viewpoints, so you understand where are your bad data, so where's the bad quality data coming, where's the low utility data coming, to tie it into kind of some of the tips and lessons that you were sharing earlier. So you can start understanding where they're coming from and then working with the individuals involved with the owners of that data, if you will, to improve the quality, improve the utility, so that it can benefit kind of like the training of, advanced LLM models, AI models, et cetera, to, eventually with the goal of automating a lot of these menial tasks and saving hours on end.
Yeah, for sure. We don't want to see AI. We don't even want to think for a moment that AI is a get out of jail free card for having great data.
Right.
AI is extremely powerful. You feed it bad data and it will help you make bad decisions. You do the converse and you can actually get return on investment. So, yes, it is a powerful new tool. It still observes all of the previous years, kind of laws of the data universe, if you will. It absolutely has to be fed good raw materials if you're going to have great outcomes.
Right. Yeah, I think those are all great points and really ties into kind of everything that we talked about today. Um, I think those are all the topics we wanted to cover today. Kind of just to wrap up from our side, we will have Q&A after this, but we understand that centralized data is not a simple task. There's a lot of challenges at hand. There's a lot of different small tips and lessons that you can apply. And it involves, navigating numerous moving pieces, diverse perspectives, and a lot of complexity. Here at Big Panda, we work with enterprise and IT teams facing these exact challenges every day, and we've seen them achieve significant measurable results through our proven framework. And if you're interested in learning more about kind of like the work C and I do, and interested in overcoming these data silos and realize the benefits of unified data, please don't hesitate to reach out at bigpanda.io. We're happy to take any inquiries and kind of talk about anything we talked about today. And also, we'll be sending out a lot of these resources today. So Shannon, that's all the content that we have prepared today, but we're happy to take any questions that have come up in the Q&A.
Well, Nathan and C, thank you so much for this fantastic presentation. If you have questions for them, feel free to put that in the Q&A panel. And just a reminder, and to answer the most commonly asked questions, I will send a follow-up email within 2 business days containing links to the slides and links to the recording. So diving in here, this is really more of a statement versus a question, but just if you want to comment on this, I think some legacy enterprises prefer layering solutions over reworking foundations.
Yeah, reworking a foundation is never an enviable task, right? Like this, you describe an accretion of solutions. Like we have our legacy and then we just kind of it's an additive process where like, well, we're going to augment we're going to augment that. But I think that we we end up finding ourselves in a cul-de-sac of augmentation where the underlying premise that we were layering all this, all of our improvements on is flawed enough now in the face of what we have in unified data, what we have in the power of agentic AI. Like we have to go back and reconsider some of those historic assumptions. They simply don't hold water in today's IT solution space. So yes, it's unenviable and it's probably one of the least popular things to do inside of an organization is organizational change. But if we don't do those things, we're simply not going to put our companies on a footing to survive into the next 2 or 3 decades, or at least it really doesn't feel like we will.
Perfect. Thank you. And you were talking about KPIs. Do you have any visuals on like how to calculate those KPIs on this particular? Yeah.
Yeah, I think in the KPIs that we brought up in terms of like noise reduction, mean time to respond, mean time to detect, et cetera, MTTX. We have some resources that I can share with Shannon about how to get started with particularly AI ops, which is very specific to our space, and how to measure kind of initial results with AI ops adoption. So I'll make sure to share that with Shannon so that Shannon can share in the follow-up emails after this webinar.
Ooh, I love it. Thank you. And has anyone refused a project at a company where the data is a real mess?
You mean actually turned down, like, yeah, no, I don't want to participate, Shannon?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, yeah, totally. Like, I didn't think anyone would ask that question. And for the folks on the that are listening, like, I'm sure many of you have this story where it's like, well, I identified bad data. I knew, I chased it to its source. I reached out to the owner, and they were significantly unenthusiastic about helping me change that data. And this is something that we run into all the time. Like, you have to provide your colleagues the why. Like, hey, I'm going to my observability administrator, and I'm asking them to tweak, a tag, or to correct a value for a tag, and they already have a day job of deploying, their solution all over the company. Like, what am I giving them for, like, a reason to do this? And strangely enough, data ends up being the argument for why you need to have good data. Oftentimes it goes back to, like, the tools rationalization, where whoever screeches the loudest gets to keep their tool. Like, oftentimes for folks upstream, it's like whoever is screeching the loudest about their problem ends up being served. And the way we need to go at our colleagues is, again, reverse it from being a subjective discussion with your colleagues to being an objective discussion. Be like, hey, I'm reaching out to you because we have a bit of we have a deficiency in the telemetry stream. We need to correct it for the following manner, and then be prepared to show them, like, hey, this is what I'm looking at from a data perspective. It doesn't matter whether you use an analytics platform or whether you've cut and pasted this information into Excel, but make your argument objectively to your colleagues so that they're like, okay, see, you do have a point there. If the assignment field is always blank, we are certainly going to have a problem, like, correcting issues with this team's telemetry. Give them the why. Like, they will do the right thing if you provide them with the why. But if you're just trying to shout louder than the other dozen people that are looking for their attention, you should expect to not have very good results. It needs to be a data-driven discussion, whether it's internal, external, or anywhere.
Very good advice. Thank you. So, how do you establish ownership and implement quality standards when no one wants to claim the poor data?
Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah, Nathan, I don't want to hog the mic. Like, if you've got some thoughts, please stop my diatribe. But yeah, when data is sketching out a picture that's best illustrated in red, nobody wants to own that data. When that data is sketching out a scenario that's best illustrated with the color green, everybody wants to own that data. But, like, there is a way to get down to this, again, hopefully in a rather objective manner. It's like, when this thing breaks, who is it in our organization that is prepared to fix it, that has the skill set and the tools and hopefully the data that we just presented them? And so you really have to chase ownership back to response. And you can do this a number of different ways. You can do a DevSecOps footing. You can do a traditional critical services team ownership footing. You can have a response team that responds for an inventory of critical applications. You can come up with your own take on this inside your organization, but the ownership has to go back to the people that actually fix things when they break. When our revenue is at risk, which teams are the teams in this scenario that can de-risk our revenue? And that's not something that's just like a volunteer thing or something that shifts from one week to another. Like there are actual audiences for that, and you have to run that question to ground with as much objectivity and diplomacy as you can. But someone has to respond. Whoever that responder is the owner.
Yeah. Uh, I think I agree with everything that C says. I think it's, C also brings up like the point of continuous improvement. Even though it is, poor data now, it's not to say that it cannot be improved in the future, especially when you're bringing objective viewpoints and understanding kind of like the direct impact, the utility of the data downstream. With, continuous improvement frameworks that we've talked about, it's an opportunity to increase the quality, increase the utility, because soon it's not to say that a red dot on a dashboard can be turned green anytime soon, right? And I think that objective point of view really starts getting the conversation going, to really start implementing continuous improvement frameworks and hopefully benefiting everyone downstream that utilizes that data in the long term.
Thank you both. Lots of great questions coming in. If we think ERP and associated modules, CRM, financials, what do you recommend is the first pool to be cleaned up for a maximum impact to business and cost point of view?
The things that affect revenue, like and obviously, like that's a simple answer. But we have things that we may not think of as revenue impacting that also fall squarely in that bucket. These are things like customer satisfaction scores and things like that can be excellent measurements, and we take those. Like this kind of takes us back to making sure that we have good KPIs and that the KPIs can be measured. But given that we've got that foundation in place, like you have to pick out the measurements in your organization that are going to affect your revenue or brand, right? Like brand can be just as important, but if you squint your eyes, brand becomes revenue. So, like, we have to find those processes and those places inside of our organizations where our revenue comes at risk. We have to make sure that we have measurements for that are not only producing high quality data, but are consistent. Like we measure it the same way each time, so we know that we get a consistent outcome. And then those are the places where we have to deploy our resources. Um, at least that's my take on it.
Yeah, I think the person who asked that also added from the human-centered point of view. I think our example is very specific to incident response. When it comes to like operators and L1 service desks, when there's messy data, they're doing a lot of manual sifting, manual investigating, maybe even going out to various different teams that own the data to understand what exactly is going on. That's a very manual process. The user experience is very, very poor as they have to go to different sources. Maybe they don't have like the context that's needed to understand what the source of data is. So I think from a human-centered point of view, in terms of kind of like optimizing these workflows, it's not only, revenue and brand, but it's also kind of like overall user experience, I think is something that you can take into account. Obviously, there are some quantitative ways to measure that, maybe like a CSAT score or likelihood to recommend. I don't know if that's necessarily applicable here, but I think that's another point to also consider. It's just the overall user experience of the end user of the data itself that is something to consider also.
Yeah, sorry I missed that human facet. Like, yeah, 100%. Like when I think about the human perspective on this, I oftentimes think about the screen of red that operational staff, stare at in their nightmares. And I think what unified data and high quality data get us is that the first step in that nightmare is that I'm staring at the screen of red, trying to discern what I'm looking at before I can ask my next question. And I think what data unification and data sanitation allows us to do is it allows us to skip that first step of looking at the sea of red, trying to discern, patterns to the very next step, which is now that I've done that, what are the questions that I want to ask of that data, of that screen? And so it allows our human operators to engage in a higher order work that is less frustrating and quite frankly is unnecessary in this day and time. Like we should not be, we should not be bludgeoning our human operators with screens of red. Like that's one thing, that's a painful step that we can take out of their experience with unification in data utility.
Right. I'll add that sometimes it's multiple screens of red
Yeah,
and
yeah, yeah,
data unification. It's at least one screen. That's a start
yeah.
point. And then it's a centralized view. So you don't necessarily have to, have this 360-degree monitor, which is exaggerating, of course, but I think that's definitely one viewpoint to take into mind. It's a single screen instead of numerous screens.
Right. Good point, Nathan.
Yeah, thank you for these views. Uh, so, we talked about data quality earlier, but how do you engage data governance, especially with data quality?
Oh my gosh. Yeah, like I kind of threw out there like continuous improvement, just do it, it's easy. Yes, it is easy provided that the architects in the organization are observing good governance. And like where we see this in the field a lot is as organizations move their solution space back and forth between the cloud and on-premise, we are architecting and tearing down and re-architecting solutions, and we oftentimes rush that process, and we will throw a new critical service out into the wild, and we really didn't think about how we're going to collect operational data off of it, or even machine data. It was just kind of an afterthought. And so one of the things that we guide our clients to do in our engagements is we tell them, hey, architecture is important. And usually when I say that, they're like, see, what does architecture have to do with it? Like, we need to do the observability thing and we need to do the incident management thing. And why do we need to trouble ourselves with architecture? Well, architecture is where governance comes in. Security also, but more of a tangent. But if you design, if you architect a solution to be absent of telemetry, that's not going to be a very operable solution. And so governance needs to start not so much as an afterthought. Governance needs to be welded into the design of solutions. And kind of sometimes audiences find that, or at least the people I work with in the field find that unintuitive, and they're like, isn't that like kind of an oversight thing where there's a committee that makes sure everyone's following the rules? Like, yeah, it can be, but it's most effective when it's also considered in the architecture of the solution itself.
Perfect. Well, that is all the questions that we have for now. See, and Nathan, it has been such a pleasure. Thank you so much for this great presentation.
Thank you, Shannon. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah, it was great to talk about this topic.
And thanks to all of our attendees for being so engaged in everything we do. I just so much appreciate it as always. And just a reminder, I will send a follow-up email by end of day Thursday for this webinar with links to the slides and links to the recording as well as anything else. So thank you all. I hope you all have a great day, and we will see you again. And thanks to Big Panda for sponsoring.
Thank you.
Hi, everybody. Thank you.